So, welcome everyone to today's Childlife Circle webinar. We're so glad you're here and part of our community of certified child life specialists dedicated to supporting children and family through healthcare experiences. So, I'm very excited to welcome Antonio Melendez to the circle. Briefly, Mr. Melendez has established a distinguished career as an impact filmmaker, fine art photographer, and music composer, with the focus on projects that address pressing social and environmental issues. His work is characterized by a commitment to supporting movements that seek to shift behaviors within large communities, particularly in the realms of environmental protection and social justice. All right, Antonio, the room is
Thank,
yours.
thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to do a little introduction in a minute. I just want to invite you all and give you time to just settle in with a piece of music called Valsinha. Well, I am so grateful to be here in support of the incredible work that you all do. Just straight from my heart, I need to express how meaningful and how valuable it is that I see you all and understanding the depth and intensity of what you face every day. And I just want to bow and acknowledge that you're all angels and that the world needs you and that I see you and I appreciate you all so much. So, with that, I want to thank you all for having me here and sharing with you. Um, when I was about 8 years old, my grandmother used to take me to church, Catholic church in Southern California. It was a modest little church. It wasn't like a big cathedral. It was pretty simple. And every Sunday, she would drag me, though I wanted to go at first, I wanted to connect. She really instilled this kind of spiritual foundation for me. But by the time I'd get there, like clockwork, 15 minutes in, I'd be looking around, looking at the statues, looking at the sanctuary, and I'd have to go to the bathroom. So I'd say, Grandma, I need to go to the bathroom. And so I'd sneak out and I'd wander. And there was this really long hallway that led to the bathroom. And along the way, there are various altars on my left, and on the right, there was stained glass windows. And so there's this red, warm light coming in. There's the smoke from the incense and the flickering of the candles. And it was a very sensual and visceral feeling. You know, all of my senses were definitely affected and felt. And during that walk, one day in particular, I stopped and I looked at a specific statue, and it was Jesus on the cross. It wasn't the main one in the main sanctuary, but it was a smaller one of Jesus on the cross. And I stopped and I looked at it, and I remember it was heavy and it was kind of scary for my little 8-year-old brain. You know, he had thorns on his crown and blood dripping on his face, and the sadness on his face, and it just felt really heavy to me. And as I scanned down, you know, there's the altar with the candles and the incense burning, and there's a big bowl, a giant bowl right in front of me. It was like copper or some kind of metal. And in between me and the altar is a fence. It's like a little barrier fence. And as I'm sitting there, I look at that water and I have this epiphany. You know, I couldn't understand how anybody else hadn't thought of this. And so I I look and I climb up on that fence and I reach over and I'm balancing like on my belly. So my little feet are hanging up, you know, they're lifted up off the ground, and I'm reaching over and I grab this bowl and I lift it. It's heavier than I thought. It was a metal bowl filled with water. And I bring it up to my face and I just start chugging, you know, and I'm spilling water all over me. The candles are sizzling and it's a little bit of a mess. And I thump it back down and I slide back down, and I'm waiting. I'm waiting for the clouds to open up, for the angel choir to start singing, and for me to be like Jesus and be holy. And the whole while I'm like, how come nobody has thought? I've got it. I've got the solution. And as I'm feeling all of that, I hear, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I jump and I look over, and there's like a Sith Lord Jedi guy in his cloak way down at the hall, and he's storming at me, and I'm like, oh shit. You know, I'm shaking, and he comes and he grabs me by the shoulder. And he's like, "What are you doing? Do you realize, you know, you're, you know, what was the word he used? You're blasphemous," and some other stuff that I didn't understand as a kid. And you know, I'm scared. He's huge. He's got his cloak and his strong hands, and he grabs me and he drags me down the hall, and he literally interrupts the sermon. "Whose boy is this?" And it echoes, and I see my grandma, and she looks over, and she makes eye contact with me, and I'm just like, oh my God. And so she comes over, and he's now kind of yelling at her, and then she says, "Stop. You do not talk about my little boy like that." And she grabs me. Now, grandma had a way of controlling me. She had these death pinchers. You know, they would dig into my shoulder, they would grab my ear, they would grab my arm. You know, if I was doing something and she couldn't say anything, she would just pinch me. So she grabs me, you know, pinches me, and we storm out of the church. And she has me go in the car. I'm sitting in the back seat. She doesn't say anything. She drives home. We get home. She says, "Go to your room." I go in my room. I shut the door. I sit on the floor and on the carpet. I remember it's like that 90s brown carpet that everybody had. And I'm leaning against the door, and I hear her call her sister, who she always gossiped everything about with. And she calls her, and I hear in through the door, "And that stupid priest yelled at my Tony." She called me Tony. He yelled at my Tony just because he was trying to be good. And then I had this, okay, well, at least grandma's not going to, you know, punish me, I hope. Well, we never went back to the church, and I wasn't about to bring it up or even ask anything about it, you know. We just never went back. You know, and I think now, looking back, living a life of curiosity, I think that little boy had no idea that his questions would get him in trouble. And my questions were, what if I drank holy water? And I just followed my curiosity to the logical, you know, end. You know, I think every single one of you chose this work in a similar way. you followed something that was calling you, something that was pulling you towards children, towards healing, towards being present in the room, one of the hardest rooms that most people will never enter. And, you know, I don't think that was a career decision, really. I think it was more a calling and a curiosity to connect with that calling. And I think that for many of you, it's possible that somewhere along the way, the weight of this work may have made that curiosity a little harder to access at times. And so my intention today is to share with you some tools and share with you some really personal, vulnerable stories of how curiosity has led me to where I'm at, into some of the most meaningful and deep connections, not only with other people and places, but with myself. Yeah. This piece is called Inverno, and it represents to me a period in my life in which emotionally it was like a very chaotic winter. And I happened to write it during winter as well. So you may notice some wintry elements in it. When I was in, I think, I think it was about nine. No, I was 21 actually. I just got back from a couple of years of service in the U.S. Coast Guard, where I became disenchanted with many things in our world. Um, and it led me to a place of reconnecting with that spirituality that I had growing up, which I left for a while. And as a young adult, I started realizing that there are so many different ways to engage and relate to God, the universe, source, whatever you want to call it. And I was really curious to what those different ways were. And I was in a world religions class. And through that class, I discovered many different, approaches. And it inspired me to spend about a year, 14 months, exploring different churches and actually participating and becoming a member for a month or so. And so I came up with a strategy, and I listed out all of the different, from Muslim to Shinto to Buddhist to Taoist to Catholic again, Jehovah's Witness, even Mormon, all the different spiritual paths that were accessible to me. And I spent a period of time, going and attending every Sunday, going to the midweek Bible study or meditation, what have you. And through that exploration, I toured a Buddhist monastery. And during that tour, I felt the most full body yes relative to the rest. My nervous system was super calm. I was very curious. My curiosity was activated to the max. The architecture, the smells, the calmness of the space. And as I was being toured through the monastery, off in the distance, I heard this music. And this music was really calling to me. And so I kind of meandered towards that. And there's a monk with me answering questions and showing me the space. And as I go towards the door, and I get to the door, it's a beautiful red handmade painted door with a big handmade handle of some kind of ancient wood. And I went to reach for it, and he puts his hand gently on me, says, "I'm sorry, you can't go in there." I'm like, "Oh, why not?" He's like, "Well, that's for, our brothers and our members that belong to the monastery." And I said, "Oh, bummer." And I remembered that. But I thought about that for the following months. At the end of that period, when I reflected on all of them, I had kind of taken notes and such. The Buddhist temple was the one that I wanted to pursue learning from and connecting with. So I went back and I began the process of this 3-month, I guess you could call it orientation, internship. It's like a trial period before you dive in fully. And so I signed up for that. And in the back of my mind was, I am going to open that door and find out what's back there. Well, I drop in, I get assigned my little room, my little bunk, my little shelf for my minimal things. And as I, have everything settled in, I get up and I remember, like, oh, now that I'm a member, I can go check out that door. So I walk over there and, I go slowly because I'm building up this anticipation. And I get to the door and I put my hand on the handle and I pull it open. And what I found on the other side of that door, I'll tell you later. What I will tell you is this, that somewhere in those months of silence and study, something happened that I really didn't expect. I realized that I had been busy moving from church to church, from the military to school, performing music. I was studying music as well, and psychology, and world cultures. And so I was constantly just going and going. And in that same process, I was taking care of my grandmother at this point. Our roles switched, and I'm taking care of her, as well as, other students. I've always naturally been drawn to support people, and I was teaching music lessons at the time to, supplement the GI Bill, which is giving me enough money for burritos and stuff. But in all of that, I was so busy that I lost the thread back to myself. And that's something that I realized. And the silence was the only thing that was able to give it back to me, that space and that silence and that peace to realize what I had stepped away from. And I think you guys experience this daily with family panicking, and the urgency of clinical stuff, and medications, and tension between departments, and different departments needing different things. It's like a constant barrage of that stuff. And when in my life, when silence has disappeared, so has my self-awareness. And when my self-awareness goes, I notice that my compassion fatigue, I guess you could say, comes in, and you're not as compassionate. And it's not because, we stop caring, because we do care, and it's always going to be there, that caring, but it's because we stop checking in with the one doing the caring. And so I want to share a tool with you that has been very valuable for me in at navigating with my kids when I'm consulting large nonprofits, and there's that urgency and that kind of frantic energy of survival mode. It's a tool that I share with it, and it's super simple. And maybe, imagine many of you do this, but I recommend that between patients, difficult patients or difficult conversations, you do what I call a 60-second reset. And it's really simple. Put your hand on your heart. Find a quiet place. If you can squeeze this in, find a quiet place. Close your eyes. One hand on your chest. And just give yourself that presence and that attention. You don't have to do anything else. 3 slow breaths, hand on your chest. You can repeat an affirmation, whatever works for you. I am here to heal. I'm enough. I'll get through this day. But really, you're checking in with yourself and just feeling, and allowing that little moment of silence to help reset you before that next conversation. And I know that can feel like a luxury to have 60 seconds, but I'm sure somewhere you can find that. And it's been really powerful for me, especially my kids are bickering and arguing over what they, who's got what toy and this and that. Before I go engage with them, I do that. Sometimes it's just 30 seconds. And then I'm able to show up with much more presence, much more compassion, and as the person that I want to show up as. This one's called chuva. Chuva is Portuguese for rain. Chuva urbana, urban rain. There was a time when my wife was going through something very frightening with her health, and I wasn't there for her. Not physically, I was present, but emotionally, I was absent. I told myself that she was being dramatic, and I minimized what she was going through, and I moved on with my day. It wasn't until years later, sitting in the therapist's office after our marriage ended, that I truly understood what actually happened in that moment. And she didn't need me to fix anything. She didn't need me to save the day. She needed me to be curious about her experience, to ask, to stay, to not make her world smaller, because I didn't have the inner space, to hold it. The most painful truth that I've had to sit with is that I couldn't fully see her, because at that point, I hadn't fully seen myself. And I don't say any of this for you to have, sympathy for me or to, pity me in any way. I tell you because I think that some of you know this feeling. It's maybe not with a spouse, but maybe it's with a patient or a coworker or a parent that's there, and whose fear felt like too much that day. It was like their weight was just too much for you. And it takes so much for us to show up in those spaces. And in those spaces, the person, in my experience, she needed more than I could find within myself to give. And it's not, again, because I didn't care. It's because my well was dry and I didn't understand. I didn't know my needs. I had been avoiding them. I abandoned many parts of myself without consciously knowing. And I never stopped throughout that period of time to notice and sit with any of that. The point being that we can really only connect with others as deeply as that we've connected with ourselves. And curiosity is the tool that I use now to connect with myself. And in this space of curiosity, there's no room for judgment, no room for fixing anything, no room for shame or guilt. There's just a genuine curiosity. And that reflected inwardly is a very helpful and healing tool to help us understand ourselves, to understand why we behave a certain way. Why did I react that way when that person said that to me? There's something there that wants to be seen, that wants to be heard, that wants to be held. Those moments of checking in with curiosity are valuable, and something I do before I do coaching for people, life coaching, transformational life coaching, and before every session, I start every 10 minutes before I clear everything, and I drop in, and again, hand on the heart, and I just say, where am I today? I ask myself, where am I today? And I let the answer come. And it's really helpful because it honors that part of me that wants to be seen, heard, held, and gives it a space to speak. And I'm the one creating that container for it. So the tool that I'm sharing with you in this context is before each shift, in the car when you park, check in with yourself, and without any judgment, without anything, just acknowledging, oh, I'm a little stressed. The other day my son got suspended from school. Right when I was in the middle of a meeting, I get a barrage of calls from the school, and I'm like, oh. And the rest of my day was a little stressed. And so when I did my check-in before that coaching call later that evening, oh yeah, I'm still feeling a little bit of the anxiety of that whole experience with my son at school. And you just check in, and it's okay. Yeah. So hopefully that's a helpful tool for you to be able to integrate into your day. It's really simple, and it's valuable, and it's been really helpful for me. All right, how are we doing on time? Okay, good. So this piece is called Light Remains. And the name of my next album is going to be called Light Remains. So this is the title piece. My previous album, Remembrance, is 5 years of inner deep excavation, transformation. And so it has an energy that's really calm, really mellow, and very moving. And this next album, Light Remains, feels like the natural, authentic expression of what remains after that experience. And so it's lighter. So yeah, this one's called Light Remains. I was thinking about my kids because they're both here today, and I had to set up the projector in the bedroom. I have a small apartment here. I had to set them up and like get them breakfast and get them all settled in with their things. And my daughter's like, "Well, Dad, I need more snacks." So we had to grab another bunch of snacks for her. And I think about how curiosity has supported me my with my babies, and how it's been a very valuable tool for me to be able to connect with them and understand where they're coming from. There's times, busy days, and I know you guys experience this as well, as you get home and you're spent and your kiddos need you, and there's dinner to be made and homework to be done, and same thing in your workspace. There's people with their needs and their energy and their whole story, and it's really easy for us to get overwhelmed and overloaded and to get reactive and to not maintain that presence, which is so vital in those moments. And with my kiddos, there was a couple of times when they were a lot younger and I was going through this big transformation for myself that I'd snap at them, and that never feels good. It never feels good to snap at your kids. And in my self-exploration, in my meditations, my journaling and such, I spent a period of time discovering how can I apply curiosity to my kids and their experience. And I reflected back that growing up, nobody was curious about my world. Nobody asked me what was going on inside me. They were always just telling me what to do, telling me to do this. I should be this. I should, and it was always very directive. And I never felt anyone really, maybe other kids and maybe that one teacher that would ask me questions about myself, but it wasn't a normal thing. And that made me think of how impactful that could be if I started implementing that for my kids. So when they're having, a hard time, and I don't want to even say it, misbehaving, when they're having a hard time, instead of telling them to stop or asking them, why are you behaving that? Why are you doing that? I do my best, again, I'm not perfect, but I do my very best to get down to their level and ask them, what's going on? What are you feeling? I'm curious. I want to understand your world. What happened? When my daughter spilled something on the table years ago, I would have been like, oh crap, and I would have, body language would have been frustrated, and I would have said, oh, grab a towel and let's clean it up. And now the presence that I strive to carry is that, oops, that was a mistake. Walk me through what happened. Tell me what happened. How did you knock it over? And then I just let her share. Oh, well, I was reaching for my book, but I was also, holding this, and then my elbow hit it. I'm like, oh, that happens. We all make mistakes. What should we do? Clean it up. You want to go grab a towel? Clean it up. And she does. And what used to have been a uncomfortable, disconnecting moment and frustration for me is now transformed into a moment of connection. And it comes from the desire to be curious about her world. And in her world, it was her elbow knocking her cup off the table. And I think about how helpful it's been to apply that in all of my relationships, colleagues, and especially in moments, tense moments, where there's conflict and tense energies. I think that ways we could apply this in your spaces is I would imagine there's I don't know, so forgive me if I sound stupid because I really don't know the full details of what the dynamic is like, but I imagine that there's nurses that are taking care of kids, and then there's other nurses from other departments, and that together you're coordinating care for this individual, and that sometimes the two departments don't understand each other, or there's a headbutting or something like that. I've just experienced it in working with nonprofits that happens all the time. So and I think, how could you use this tool in that sense is asking questions when somebody's coming at you with tense energy, is asking for them to help you understand where they're coming from. And instead of defending, which I used to do, is of like, well, no, this is what I think it should be because I know, because I'm doing this and that. But calming that, and in turn just leaning in and saying, help me understand what's most important for you right now, and how that affects our patient or our project, and what would help you feel most heard in this moment. And maybe it's not appropriate to say that to colleagues. Maybe it's better for patients or for your kids or people in your family. But I've found that stopping and asking those questions have been very helpful for keeping the vibe mellow, and ultimately arriving at the solution or the place that we both want to be at. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like that one question does so much more that any defending or arguing could possibly do. This next piece is called La Lua. It means of the moon. And my daughter's name is Luna. And I wanted to write a piece of music that really reflected her sweet, helpful, silly, creative energy. Oh yeah, disclaimer, I'm also playing shortened versions for time. All these pieces are much longer. Many of them have a string quartet in them as well, so I've kind of shrunk them down to fit in the context of this event, as well as, yeah, I can't have a string orchestra with me today, so... sweet little girl. She's such a goober. All right. So, kind of recapping on everything I've shared with you today. When I was a little boy and I climbed that fence to drink holy water, I got dragged by the ear, humiliated in front of the whole congregation. I never stopped asking questions because of that. I could have. And actually, I take that back. There was a period of time where it shut down. That curiosity shut down. Fortunately, at around 21 years old after the military, it came back. And I'm so grateful because I started asking questions all the time again. And in college, I got to. And I was the annoying guy in class that wanted to know everything. Every story that I've shared with you is a direct result of that curiosity. The monastery, the connection with my kids, with my ex-wife. These are all connections and things that changed my life. And all of it started with a kid who decided to refuse to stop wondering, stop being curious. And each of you have that child inside of you, that little one that was so curious, the one who chose this work not because it was safe or easy or even well paid, but because something in you was curious about what it meant to truly show up for another human being in their most vulnerable moments. And that's a beautiful thing. And that door. You ready? When I went through it, the music was gone. There was light. There was incense. There was space. And there was silence. And then I realized that months before, the music that I had heard the music that had pulled me back to that monastery. And through all that searching, that music was actually never behind that door. It was something calling me back to myself. And every journey that I've been on since then, my years in the Amazon, the stages I performed in, the nonprofits I've served all over the world, and the connections that I've made, has been me following that same music and then expressing it. Curiosity is the music, and it doesn't live behind any door. It's been playing inside of us the whole time. And I want to encourage you with kindness and love and support to not let the intensity and the challenges of day-to-day, things dim that and silence it. I want to encourage you to protect it and to feed it, because it deserves being fed, and you deserve that. You deserve being fed. And that curiosity inside you is a beautiful gift that you get to bring with you every day. The day we stop being curious about the people around us, the day I stop being curious about my kids, the day you stop being curious about the kids that you help, and about what they're really feeling and about what they're really asking and what they really need, it's the day that it just becomes a job. And I don't think that's who any of you guys are. I can feel your hearts because you're doing what you're doing. And like I said before, you're angels. In my concerts, I have the room full of candles. These are little LED ones. A candle doesn't hoard its light. It just burns openly and honestly. And everything around it gets illuminated. And that's really what you all do every day when you walk into that hospital. So I leave you with one question to carry, as we leave today. Think about where in your life you have stopped asking, where you've stopped being curious, and what might open up for you if you start asking again. Thank you so much for the work that you do. And thank you for being here with me. And thank you for letting me share this light with you. And I'm truly grateful. And I'm going to play one more piece for you before I go. This one's called Soluciones, Solutions. Thank you. I appreciate you all. Be blessed. Have a beautiful day.
Antonio, thank you so, so much. That was beautiful on so many levels. And we so appreciate the insights that you shared, the music that you shared. I think I can speak for a lot of us that that was a much needed breath that we all needed throughout our day. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
All right.